Carnegie makes a fascinating observation here. He says, you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you.
That's probably one of the most famous lines in the entire book. And when you think about it, it's surprisingly true. Many people spend years trying to become more impressive. They want a better job, a better car, a better social media profile. But Carnegie says the secret isn't making yourself more interesting. It's becoming more interested in others. Carnegie shares a story about a salesman who struggled to win customers. One day, he changed his approach. Instead of focusing on selling, he started focusing on people. He learned their interests, their hobbies, their families, their challenges.
And what happened?
His relationships improved dramatically, and so did his business, because people could feel that his interest was real, not just a strategy.
Have you ever noticed that some conversations feel like interviews? One person asks questions, the other person answers, but the questions feel forced.
That's because genuine interest cannot be faked for very long. People are surprisingly good at sensing authenticity.
Carnegie tells a story about a man who worked with dogs. The man noticed something interesting. Dogs are always happy to see you. They don't try to impress you. They don't try to sell you anything. They simply show enthusiasm.
Carnegie's point is simple. People naturally enjoy being around positive energy. And one of the easiest ways to show positive energy is through a smile.
He even says that a smile costs nothing, yet it creates a lot of value.
Imagine entering your classroom every morning. One teacher always looks annoyed. The other teacher smiles and greets students warmly.
Which teacher do students usually enjoy more?
Exactly. The smile doesn't solve every problem, but it changes the emotional atmosphere. Chapter 3. Remember that a person's name is important. Carnegie believed names were incredibly important. In fact, he wrote, "A person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language."
That's a powerful statement.
And it explains why hearing our name gets our attention immediately, even in a crowded room. Carnegie tells stories about leaders who remembered thousands of names, not because they had superhuman memories, but because they understood the value of making people feel recognized. Chapter 4. Be a good listener.
Carnegie says something that many people forget. Most people are more interested in themselves than in anyone else.
That sounds harsh, but if we're honest, it's often true. We're thinking about our plans, our problems, our goals, our worries. Carnegie tells the story of a dinner guest who was considered a brilliant conversationalist. After the evening ended, the host praised him for being incredibly interesting. But here's the surprising part. The guest barely talked about himself. Most of the evening was spent listening and asking questions.
That's amazing. The host thought he was interesting because he made other people feel interesting.
Exactly. That's one of the biggest lessons in the entire book. Chapter 5. Talk in terms of the other person's interests. Carnegie gives an example of someone who wanted to build a relationship with an important business executive. Before meeting him, he learned that the executive was passionate about a particular subject.
So he prepared for that topic?
Exactly. And the meeting became much more successful because the conversation focused on something the executive genuinely cared about.
Let's bring this into today's world. Imagine you're a content creator. You spend hours creating videos. What's the first question you should ask?
Not, what do I want to talk about, but what problem does my audience want solved?
Oh, that's a huge difference. And it's exactly what Carnegie is teaching.
Chapter 6. Make the other person feel important. This chapter contains one of Carnegie's most famous ideas. Always make the other person feel important. and do it sincerely.
That last part matters. Sincerely. Not fake, not manipulative, real.
Throughout the book, Carnegie shows that people respond positively when their efforts are appreciated, whether it's an employee, a student, a friend, or a family member. Everyone wants to feel that they matter. Final thought.
When you look at all 6 principles together, there's a pattern.
That's true. None of them focus on changing other people. They focus on changing how we treat other people.
And that's probably why this book is still popular almost a century after it was written.
Because human nature hasn't changed very much. People still want respect. People still want attention. People still want to feel valued. And these 6 principles help us give that to others.
See you in next episode.
3. How to win people to your way of thinking.
Mia, let's quickly remember what we have learned so far.
That's right. We learned 6 ways to make people like us. We talked about becoming genuinely interested in others, smiling, remembering names, listening carefully, talking about other people's interests, and making people feel important.
And if you think about it, all those principles have something in common.
They focus on building relationships.
Exactly. Because before you can influence someone, people need to enjoy being around you. Before people listen to your ideas, they need to feel respected.
Which brings us to today's question. What happens when you disagree with someone?
What happens when you're convinced you're right, but the other person thinks they're right too?
Maybe it's a disagreement with a friend, a coworker, a customer, a family member, or even someone arguing with you online.
Most people immediately try to prove they're right.
They gather evidence, raise their voice, repeat their point again and again.
And usually the argument becomes worse, not better. Let me ask you something. Have you ever won an argument and still lost the relationship?
That's a powerful question, because many people have experienced exactly that. Maybe they proved their point. Maybe they had all the facts. Maybe they technically won.
Yet afterward, the other person felt embarrassed, frustrated, or angry.
Carnegie believes that's because people rarely change their minds when they feel attacked.
Instead, they become defensive. What does defensive mean?
Defensive means trying to protect yourself from criticism or attack. When people feel defensive, they stop listening and start protecting their position.
And that's exactly why this section of the book is so valuable.
And remember, whenever we come across difficult words or expressions, we'll stop and explain them in simple English.
Because our goal isn't just to help you understand the book.
It's also to help you improve your English while discovering powerful ideas that can change your life. Introduction to Part 3. This section may be one of the most useful parts of the entire book.
Because disagreements are everywhere. At work, at school, in business, in relationships, and especially on social media. Yet, Carnegie teaches something surprising. If your goal is to change someone's mind, the direct approach is often the worst approach.
That's right. People don't like being told they're wrong, even when they actually are wrong.
So instead of forcing ideas onto people, Carnegie shows us how to guide conversations in a way that makes agreement much more likely.
And the first principle is probably the most famous lesson in the entire book. Chapter 1. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
Wait, avoid it? That sounds impossible.
It does at first, but listen to what Carnegie says. You can't win an argument.
That's one of the most famous quotes in the book.
And when you think about it, he's making an important point. If you lose an argument, you lose. But if you win an argument, you often lose too, because the other person feels defeated, and nobody enjoys feeling defeated. Story example. Imagine arguing with a friend about football. You bring statistics, examples, facts, evidence, and eventually your friend says, "Fine, whatever."
Sounds like victory.
But is it? Did your friend really change their mind? Or did they simply stop talking?
That's a huge difference.
Exactly. Carnegie argues that people rarely change their beliefs because they were embarrassed into doing so. What does embarrassed mean? Embarrassed means feeling uncomfortable or ashamed in front of others. Nobody enjoys that feeling, which is why public arguments often fail.
So, Carnegie isn't saying we should never disagree.
No, he's saying we should be careful about turning disagreements into battles. Because once people start fighting to protect their pride, the original issue becomes much harder to solve. Chapter 2. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say, "You're wrong."
But what if they are wrong?
Telling them they are wrong is a direct blow to their intelligence and their pride. It makes them want to strike back. It doesn't make them want to agree with you. Carnegie shares a story about a young manager who was reviewing a contract with a client. The client made a factual mistake. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," the manager used a different approach. He said, "I may be wrong. I frequently am. Let's examine the facts."
That completely changes the tone.
Exactly. By admitting that he might be wrong, he stopped the argument before it even started. The client immediately became open-minded, and they were able to fix the mistake without anyone feeling foolish. Chapter 3. If you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
That leads perfectly into the next chapter. What happens when we are the ones making the mistake?
That's hard for a lot of people, but Carnegie says, if you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
What does emphatically mean?
Emphatically means saying it with strong feeling and absolute clarity, without making excuses. Carnegie tells a personal story about his dog, Rex. He used to take Rex to a park without a muzzle or a leash. This was actually against the law.
Did he get caught?
He did. A police officer scolded him. The next time it happened, Carnegie didn't wait for the officer to speak. He immediately started criticizing himself. He admitted he was entirely at fault and had no excuses.
And how did the officer react?
Because Carnegie took all the blame, the officer took the opposite position. The officer became forgiving. He let Carnegie go with just a friendly warning.
That's human nature, isn't it? When we fight, the other person fights back. When we surrender, they often become generous. Chapter 4. Begin in a friendly way.
That brings us to Chapter 4. If you want to convince someone of something, begin in a friendly way.
Even if you are upset?
Especially if you are upset. If your temper is high and you say harsh things, you might feel better, but the other person will simply put up a wall. Carnegie references an old fable about the sun and the wind. They were arguing about who was stronger.
I remember this one. They tried to make a man take off his heavy coat.
Exactly. The wind blew as hard and as cold as it could. But the harder the wind blew, the tighter the man wrapped his coat around himself.
Then the sun came out, and it simply shined warmly.
Right. And very quickly, the man felt warm and took off his coat on his own.
So the lesson is that friendliness is stronger than force.
Always. A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall. Chapter 5. Get the other person saying yes right away.
Why does that matter?
Because no is a very difficult obstacle to overcome. Once someone says no, their pride demands that they stick to it. But a yes response keeps their mind moving in a positive, open direction. He tells the story of a bank teller who was dealing with a stubborn customer. The customer refused to fill out certain information on a required form.
Did the teller tell him it was bank policy?
No! Instead, the teller agreed with the customer that the information wasn't strictly necessary for opening the account. But then he asked a few questions. He asked, if you die, wouldn't you want the bank to transfer the money to your closest relative?
And the customer said yes.
Then wouldn't it be a good idea to give us their name right now, just in case?
Another yes.
Exactly. By the end of the conversation, the customer willingly filled out the entire form because his attitude had shifted from negative to positive.
Looking at all these examples, it really comes down to one thing: dropping our own ego.
That's exactly right. If we want people to agree with us, we have to stop trying to force them. We have to stop trying to prove how smart we are.
And start walking beside them instead.